G'day, I'm Rob.
Hello, I'm Stephen.
And you're listening to the Doctor Who Show, where this week we're looking at Rosa, and I am joined by, well, you just heard him, it's the man himself, it's Stephen from New to Who. G'day, Steve.
Hi, Rob, how's it going?
I'm not bad at all.
Good to hear.
Yeah, this is new, you and me doing this show.
Yeah, I've long wanted to get on, so here I am, and you might get me back again at this rate.
Yeah, Stephen had Dave bumped off during the week, and that's why we're doing the show. No, as we said at the last episode, Dave is in Canberra this week. It's one of his infamous Canberra jaunts. And with that, let's rip into the episode for our hot take.
Let's do it.
Up front, Steve, I'm going to say I really enjoyed this. And I'll say here and now it's not a 10 out of 10 for me, but it has leapt ahead of the past 2 weeks very easily.
Yeah, look, I would very much agree with that, Rob. I said that this is needed to be a very, very good episode. I think at the third one into the season, we needed to see like a really, really good one, and I think we got that. So, mission accomplished.
Absolutely. And of course, tellingly, this is the first non-Chibnall story. I mean, okay, I know he gets some billing on the credits, but I'm going to presume here this was more Mallory Blackman than Chris writing this. And it's just interesting that the first sort of non-Chibnall-ish story has done so well.
I wouldn't read too much into it, but I do take your point. I think the first two had a lot of heavy lifting to do, and I'm not sure if they're exactly the kinds of stories that maybe we'd expect from Chris Chibnall going into his reign later on. But I can understand why you say that, and nonetheless, a really good script, and I think he had a hand in it. It was a co-write credit, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was Mallory Blackman and Chris Chibnall, so he's done something there, that's for sure. Now, I did some research on Mallory. Obviously, Mallory is British. She's a woman, also a person of colour, and was the Children's Laureate from 2013 to 2015. She's in her mid-50s, and aside from being British, I think they're all pretty distinct things from most of the other New Who writers we've had to date.
Yeah, look, I think it's really important that we have diversity in the show, both on screen and behind the scenes. So, having someone who's such an esteemed writer as well is only going to add to the show. So it's great to see.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there have been so few women writing on Doctor Who at all. I mean, that's a big step up for starters. Let alone her other credentials. So I'm already hoping she comes back because she did a really good job here.
Yeah, likewise. I think it'd be criminal if this is the only script that she ever writes for Doctor Who.
Yeah. Now, having said all that, I think if Blackman and or Chibnall isn't a fan of Vincent and the Doctor, I'm probably a poor judge. Looking at this story, the historical setting, the inconsequential baddie, it leads up to a climax with contemporary music blaring. I mean, chuck in the explanatory history nerd ending, that was the Unquiet Dead to me. And I think this was like part Unquiet Dead, part Vincent and the Doctor. Steve, am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. And in fact, I think I said during the week that this episode needed to be this Doctor's Vincent and the Doctor kind of episode. All of those parallels are absolutely true, but I think also in terms of the way in which it treated a very sensitive issue and a real-life historical figure, I think there's great degrees of parallels between the two of them for sure.
Yeah, now one thing, when I was watching it, I was thinking, how are the Americans going to take this? Because, I think when shows from other countries come along and present your history, like the history of your country, even when they have a very clear view of it, and even when they're reporting it just as it happened, the results can really sting a bit. And I don't know if that's got to do much with our history classes or what, but I'm just wondering, Americans going to watch this and be a bit like, wince a bit, like, yes, this happened, but ouch, it still hurts.
I'm not going to pretend that was very much a concern of mine as well. I didn't think it was going to be a showstopper, but I think it was one of those things that they needed to judge very, very carefully. But I think that they did. I think there's a number of reasons for that. There's obviously the script and the production itself, but aside from all of that, US history is so, really important to 20th century and 21st century history as well. So I think a lot of people have an awareness of it, and the civil rights movement being sparked by that one act by Rosa Parks sort of reverberates around the world, not just across the US, even to this day. So I think we have that shared common cultural history emanating from that point in time, whereas as opposed to, going back to Victorian times where there isn't maybe such an international kind of relevance to that, or the other way, to say the Civil War, for instance, in America, where as non-American viewers, we probably wouldn't really have too much of an in. But I think with Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement and that entire discourse, I think we do very much have an in, and very much do have a stake in it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, not being a US citizen, I don't know how much of this gets taught in history classes over there. I just have a feeling, though, in history classes around the world, the less savoury things maybe don't get swept under the carpet, but maybe not enough attention is given to them. And then suddenly,
possible, yeah.
Then suddenly it's front and centre in, someone's favourite TV show, and the companion's getting hit in the face within the first, 5 minutes or something.
Yeah, that was shocking and really effectively done, wasn't it?
Absolutely. He was picking up was it her gloves or a hanky or something?
Yeah, it was her gloves, yeah. Just being kind.
Yeah, and that really set the scene. And in fact, my wife Jamie, who is American, watched that and was like, ooh, yeah, they're not pulling punches here, are they?
No, but I think they couldn't afford to. I think if you had to do this right, which they definitely needed to, you couldn't shy away from the reality of that. And I think, presenting like a watered down version of that would have actually been an injustice to this, not just the story, but the era as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So it's certainly taken a swing away from the first two episodes, which, little sci-fi stories, and the second one in particular is a bit of a runaround and, laser guns and things. And suddenly, gosh, this was quite surprising. And just, we'll get to a lot of feedback at the end of the show, but I think a lot of people were pleasantly surprised, maybe even a bit shocked by it.
Look, it's just such a step up from the previous two stories, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, it's kind of like going from the Keys of Marinus to the Aztecs in many ways, or maybe even the Time Meddler. It's such a step up in terms of consequence, I guess, but also quality too, and it needed to. I think it really needed to. I think the first two, did a lot of heavy lifting, set the scene. Thanks very much, ticked all those boxes, but we needed a story like this, and boy, did it deliver.
Yeah, and I mean, you say that, but they're still introducing concepts to the viewers, like Artron energy, for example.
Yeah, so isn't this interesting? So obviously Chibnall was saying, there's no past references and whatever else. I counted a good half a dozen or so past references, whether that was to the Storm Cage, not lots of other sort of like little tributes and nods to the past and kisses to the past. So it's not all gone. It's not just a total reboot. So I'm kind of secretly pleased about that. But yeah, there's definitely stuff creeping in that it makes it Doctor Who, and I guess requires the audience to buy into that. So that's no bad thing for me.
Yeah, I was surprised and sort of delighted by that Storm Cage reference, because, as you say, I didn't think things like that would be popping up. Like that's a very Moffat sort of invention.
Yeah. And we had the perception filters, and then there was the anachronistic use of the mobile phones. It was just glorious. I really liked that. I really appreciated it. This is Doctor Who, both for a modern new audience, but also for us, crusty old fans as well.
Yeah, Elvis giving the mobile phone to Frank. that is so Moffat. That's like a Christmas Carol and hanging out with Marilyn Monroe and things.
Exactly. Yeah, and I love it.
And look, just to rewind a little, I'm not saying any of this about the US history to beat up on the US. I think all countries' histories have moments that can make people squirm, whether it's quarter of a century later, half a century later, a century later.
I do like the fact, though, that it wasn't sort of presented as this was a problem of the past and it's now something that's solved and isn't relevant and applicable. That sort of fight for justice continues, and there was that really lovely scene, and we're probably jumping the gun here behind the rubbish can.
Jump the gun,
right? Yeah, just that really sort of lovely moment where it was Yaz and Ryan behind the dumpster, and they were talking about how this is something that they have to contend with as part of their everyday lives, even back home in Sheffield in 2018. So I appreciated that. I appreciated that it wasn't just like, here's this terrible thing that once happened in the deep south of the US and it's not a problem anymore, blah, blah, blah. It's something that actually really does permeate into today's life as well.
Mm. And of course, it also makes people think about history. And this was one of the things Chibnall was saying before the series started. It's going to be educational. And some people took that very badly on Twitter. Some people saying, I don't need him telling me, what to think or teaching me about history. It was like, well, it's kind of where the show's come from. This could be quite interesting. And I think this is the first salvo in that sort of desire of Chibnall's to, maybe not in every episode, as we've seen the first two weren't like that at all, but in some of them to maybe educate, like some of the Hartnell episodes did.
Oh, look, I was just going to say that there is strong historical precedence for historicals in Doctor Who, if you like, and Hartnell's very much the sort of springwell for that. We've already sort of noted that there's definitely Hartnell references and influences in the new era as well. And, that whole sort of, we have to ensure history takes place as it should, or time as we know it will be in jeopardy kind of narrative is something that definitely has been done in the past with Doctor Who, so it's not new to us. But I think the way that it was done in this one here, like the dramatic stakes and tension that it sort of created was actually really effective for a much more modern viewership as well. It wasn't just like, here's Doctor Who getting on a high horse doing educational sort of historicals again. It's actually something that I think worked as a modern piece of drama.
Yeah, another aspect of being a modern piece of drama is the whole look of it. When I think of the kids shows I grew up that were trying to teach me things, they didn't look half as good as this. This looked like a film in places, and it's to do with these new cameras they've got or something on the production. It just looked big and expensive.
It's astonishing. The whole thing just sweeps and looks like some sort of wonderfully cinematographied sort of film. It's glorious. I love how it looks and feels, and it looks so. I don't know what the right word is, but the first word that comes to mind is expensive, and I say that as someone who grew up on pretty crap 70s and 80s Doctor Who special effects in the 90s, thinking, this looks a bit crap. So to have my show look like this, it's just so good. Yeah,
it's fantastic, and even attention to detail, like, advertisements, on the street that they just casually walk past, and they weren't being focused on. I think this was filmed, I want to say this was filmed in South Africa too, like the second episode.
Ah, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've got a feeling this was filmed overseas somewhere, possibly South Africa. I really should have looked that up before the show started.
Well, I wish I could help, but I have this terrible habit of going into spoiler lockdown before any of the series and the stories. So I've probably missed that. It's probably already been sort of on a Doctor Who Confidential or whatever the equivalent is these days. But I've missed that quite by intention. But yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe that was South Africa. It definitely did not look like a quarry in England or Wales. Yeah, I thought it was beautiful. Just looked so warm and so very, very, I guess, like maybe what you'd expect from a US television show set in the Deep South.
Yeah, and the costumes, and again, as I say, the attention to detail, everything just worked for me with this, and I thought, ooh, this is really good, because, we know the BBC can knock it out of the park with period dramas that might be set in the 1920s or 30s or Victorian London or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to do this location, that was a bit of a stretch. And as I say, I don't think it was filmed in the UK, but it was still the BBC presenting it, and they did so well.
Yeah, hats off to them. Again, and I'm surprised because you're right. If they do a Downton Abbey, it looks amazing. But for it to be 1950s USA and to look so authentic is really great too.
Yeah, and even the accents too. I mean, I haven't looked into these actors behind them, but their accents were pretty damn good.
To a non-American, yeah, absolutely. Whether again our US viewers are able to differentiate between regional dialects and accents, then that maybe is another issue. But I thought it definitely spoke of that sort of southern drawl and twang.
True. Before we get into characters specifically, is there anything about the production you wanted to talk about, or the story as a whole, before we sort of drill down a bit?
Not really, other than the fact that I kind of mentioned it before, the whole idea that this is a really sensitive and modern take on the historical, and sort of takes it even one step further from the historical as we knew it, which was, like I say, that whole we have to make sure history takes place in the way that it's meant to, kind of not one line approach of Hartnell into something that is much more powerful by, I guess, virtue of the fact of representing it as it actually was, or as best as we can sort of reconstruct that era anyway. So I'm really happy with that. I had, like I say, reservations about this one. I didn't know that it was going to be pulled off in quite the way that it was. It's obviously a very sensitive subject matter and something that is very, very important to very many people. So for them to have sort of told a story that was worth telling, rather than sort of saying, hey, we're doing this and we're kind of doing it in a way that is maybe a little bit disingenuous, they avoided all of that and they actually hit it out of the park.
Which brings me to a question that I'll ask again before we get to these characters, because this is something I've seen you talk about on Twitter, and I know you could probably talk about it all night. And that's and that's the desire for historicals. And we should differentiate here to an old school Doctor Who fan, and historical is a story where there's no sort of sci-fi elements. Well, aside from the TARDIS landing, of course. You know, so you'd look at, say, the Davo story, The Visitation. That's not a historical because it's got pteroleptals in it. Whereas maybe Black Orchid would be. Whereas in this modern era, if something is set in a historical era on Earth, fans are quite happy to say it's a historical. And to them, this was a historical, even though it had an alien in it, you know, trying to mess things up. Where do you stand, Steve, on people and historicals and the desire for them out there?
Look, I think, you know, there's a great renaissance. You know, I mentioned Downton Abbey before, and all of those kinds of sort of representations of historical eras of the past. There's a kind of a glamour to it, and they're particularly done well in things like The Crown, for instance, on Netflix, where it sort of transports you back, or Victoria, for instance. So I'm not going to say that there isn't an appetite for it, but I think that it doesn't quite work in the modern sense for Doctor Who, because if you want historical, I guess you could always watch The Crown or Victoria or whatever the case is. It may not necessarily work through the expectations, the audience's expectations of what Doctor Who should be or could be. And I think in that situation, if you have a historical, I think you do need the alien threat, because it comes part and parcel with, I guess, audience expectations of what Doctor Who is. But I think it's actually more successful in the telling of a Doctor Who story in modern days as well, in having that pteroleptal in the corner or in the basement, because otherwise you kind of just go through the motions of it becomes a curio. The Doctor lands in X history and this happens, but they can't really affect it, and then they go away and maybe they've learnt something, but there isn't that kind of peril, or there isn't the kind of dramatic impetus that's required for modern storytelling to really make it successful. So in that regard, and to sort of summarize my points on Twitter, the point that I was making was that historicals, pseudo-historicals would definitely work in Doctor Who, but I don't think we're going to get Doctor Who and the Crusades or Doctor Who and the Aztecs anytime soon, because I just don't think that's where we're at as a viewership.
Yeah, very true, very true.
But just my point of view.
Now, why don't we start with the characters, and we'll start with the villain, Krasko. As I said earlier, he is a very inconsequential villain, like the monster that was in Vincent and the Doctor. At times, I felt he had quite a bit of menace, like he looked menacing, that black beard and his look and the leather jacket, that was all very cool.
Sure, yeah.
At other times, though, he didn't feel quite real to me.
I agree.
Okay, well, take over for a moment, Steve. What did you think of Krasko?
Sorry, I feel like I'm treading on your toes here, but
not at all.
I think you're right. He was probably designed to be a sort of low stakes villain, and the reason why I think it's pretty two dimensional is that it's meant to be a bit of a cipher rather than a character. I mean, we may well see this character turn up again, but it's more so a stand-in or a sort of representation of, largely, I think anyway, the sort of alt-right movement, particularly in the US at the moment. And to sort of give that too much of a character or too much of a face would personalise what is instead a movement. And I think that's probably why they have sort of left Krasko as a bit of a enigmatic but also underdeveloped kind of menace to the plot. I think he needed to be. So in that regard, I agree. We don't have a fleshed out villain in this regard, but I think the villain is not a character. I think the villain in this instance is an idea, and the idea needs to be kept suitably ill-defined to maintain that this is representative of a larger discourse rather than, someone who's twirling their mustache and coming up with outrageous schemes.
No, look, very, very well said, because at first I was wondering, whether a person from the future wouldn't be a bit more enlightened, and would they be really hung up on where it all went wrong? And, and I guess the message here is that you can have space Nazis pop up no matter how well things go in the future. People like this can maybe still pop up, and some things obviously triggered him, and it's all about race. And I mean, I think, well, gosh, he's from the future. Are people not over race? Because you'd be dealing with lots of aliens and all sorts of different people and skin colours by that time. But he's not. He's really hung up on this is where it all went wrong.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But again, maybe the question can be asked of like 2018. Are we still having this conversation? 1955 was a long time ago, but the examples that Yaz and Ryan sort of recollect about their everyday lived experience is something that's very much real, not just for them, but for millions of people. And I think, again, that question is kind of there to a rhetorical one that's meant to be asked of us. It's like, it's 2018, we're still having this conversation, and the reality, sad reality may well be that we have this in, I don't know, whatever century this Krasko character is from, because there's always that sort of inherent nastiness, I suppose, of humanity. It's just part of our nature, but hopefully you'd like to think that, and this is another thing that the story very much sort of underlined, is that there is that progress, that we have moved forward, that things are never going to, or they haven't as yet at least, sort of reached that utopian sort of state, but we are moving in the right direction, and every small victory counts.
Now, I've got more to say about Krasko, but that's going to pop up during the sports desk, so I'm happy to move on.
Okay, sure.
The Dr. Graham, Ryan or Yaz, where do you want to go next, Steve?
Can we start with Yaz, please?
Absolutely.
For 100 points.
Yaz for 100 points. Steve, the floor is yours.
Look, I really like her. I think the actress is really wonderful, Mandip Gill. I still am waiting for a story where she's got more to do than Nyssa has in the TARDIS. And I really want to see that next week, and I think we're going to get it, but it's probably a little bit overdue.
Yeah, look, I've made a note here. Yaz, once again, the spare wheel. But I think she got a bit more to do this week. She got to do the investigation. She had it like a map, and she was drawing and, doing some stuff. And she had some good lines. I think she was fleshed out a little more. I had the sense she was Pakistani, and so she was likely Muslim, but in this episode it was made explicit that she is a Muslim, and she's been off to the mosque, and someone called her a horrible name coming back from the mosque, I think the story was. And I think, I think this might be our first Muslim companion, and no fuss has been made over that. I think the closest we got in the past was in the God Complex.
Complex, yes.
One of the characters, I think Rita, was Muslim. Right. Yes. And I love the God Complex. It's one of my favourite Smithy stories.
So good.
And that's the closest we've got to a companion. She was like a surrogate companion for the episode. But aside from that, we've never had a Muslim companion before. I thought more might have been made of this. For example, when we had Bill Potts coming in, it was like, okay, the Doctor's getting the first, gay companion and so on,
That's a good point.
I just thought more might have been mentioned about it. I don't know. Maybe it's a touchy subject for the PR department. Who knows?
Or and this is like very much in keeping with Chris Chibnall's sort of approach to media sort of leaks and reports and stuff like that. So little has come out that I guess he's just waiting for the story to unfold for the audience rather than prime us in that way.
Yeah, no, quite right. So, yeah, look, that was Yaz for me. Again, the spare wheel, but I think she had a little more. It wasn't much more, but it was a little more.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
I'm going to say we should talk about Ryan next, because I got some notes on Ryan here. See how these sit with you, Steve.
Yes, please.
Ryan, I think, did really, really well here. That conversation where he admits he's struggling and would just like to start bashing people, really brought it home. For me, I'm not someone who's been in that situation, just how oppressive it must feel. Of course, he's coming from a background where it's better. It's still a work in progress, but it's better for him where he comes from. So there was a bit of culture shock at play as well. But regardless, he can't pick up the woman's gloves. He can't sit on the bus with the Doctor and Graham. Could he seriously be taken away and beaten to death? Well, yes, he could.
Absolutely.
And so his anger and fear, I felt, was very real and really brought it home for the audience.
I think, we're going to talk about this later on the sports desk, or at least I am. This was such an important part of the story. I mean, to have, even just in the small visual cues, Ryan having to sit 2 or 3 seats behind where the Doctor and Graham are sitting, and that's heartbreaking. There's that wonderful moment where again, they're sitting behind the scene and he's talking about, police targeting still being a thing in 2018 for young black men in the UK. And that this is something that, is it makes his blood boil. It really does provoke him. And this was a really beautiful character moment for me. It's the lesson that he's learnt from his nan, Grace, that has made him sort of rise above that. Don't give him any reason, he says. And I think that's a far more enlightened approach. So it's beautiful to see that in someone who's, ostensibly a 19-year-old young man who should be angry at the world for a number of reasons, but is someone who maybe is looking to rise above all of that. I think it was a really noble character moment for him. Really, really touched him.
Yeah.
Touched me, rather.
Yeah, I was really, really taken with that. So, hats off to Ryan in this episode.
Definitely. And that he sort of gets a little bit of a... in amidst this terrible setting that is just horrific for him in particular, being able to talk with Martin Luther King and talk with Rosa Parks in their home, that was a beautiful moment, particularly when, and this was another sort of touching scene where Martin Luther King is able to pay his condolences to the passing of his nan, and you could see, in Tosin Cole's wonderfully sort of acted reaction that it really meant a lot to Ryan. It was a really beautiful moment.
Yeah, and look, a quick nod, I don't know whether it's intentional or not, to Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, when Bill and Ted would often refer to their friends from history as, Billy the Kid or Abraham Lincoln, and call them by their full name. And here we had Ryan saying, "Oh, thank you, Martin Luther King. Oh, hey, Rosa Parks."
Nice pickup, yeah.
I don't know if it was intentional, it just reminded me of it.
So good. That's in my head canon.
Okay, which leaves us with the Doctor and Graham. Where do you want to go next, Steve?
Let's leave the Doctor to last. Let's go with Graham.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Again, just another eminently likeable performance. I think Graham's fast becoming sort of the character that's stealing the show for me. I really look forward to each of his scenes and the way that he's integrating into, life aboard the TARDIS and, life post losing his wife, and all of that is just, I don't know, he's just got such a sense of humour, and that's shining through as well. I just think he's great.
Yeah, and look, I've been Team Graham since our first hot take. Dave wasn't as sure about him in the first episode, sort of come around to him in the second episode, but I've been Graham from the start, and not just because my cat is called Graham, as I said back then. Again, he got most of the good lines, and he came across as totally human with the I don't want to be part of this line on the bus at the end. He was almost going to ruin everything by just getting out of there, and he didn't want to be part of it. And it was because he's so human. And I know he didn't have the same direct issues as Ryan, and to a lesser degree Yaz in this episode. The world he was in here is built for middle-aged white men like him who just want to sink piss and play pool, and the world's their oyster. It's fantastic.
But he's not like them. That's the point, though, isn't it?
Exactly. He's cut from different cloth, and we already knew that via his relationship with Grace and the relationship he's trying to have with Ryan and whatnot. He's a good egg, basically.
Yeah, he really is. I didn't have any hang-ups about Bradley Walsh when he was announced, and I didn't have any sort of negative reaction to seeing him in that first episode, where I thought, again, he was just as good as he has been in the other two episodes that I've seen him in. But Bradley Walsh is just... there's an incredible moment, and it is that moment on the bus. You can just see it in his face, that empathy that he's able to convey through just a look, and it's the way that his face falls, and you can see the sort of knot pitting in his stomach, that, oh my God, he's going to be part of, something that he hasn't been able to, that he's always been able to sort of think is I guess, above and not a part of. And there he is at ground zero at something that later would have an enormous impact on, his own story with Grace. I think that one particular moment was fantastic, but he's also able to do comedy really well as well. The scene by the river there by the creek was just absolutely comedic gold, and the way he delivered it, every single line and every single word was just genius. I loved it.
Yeah, he is stealing the show in places, that's for sure. I'm very happy with him. And like most Australians, we don't have sort of a reference for him. Unless people have watched Law and Order UK, no. I don't think...
I've not, no.
No, well, I haven't either. And we don't really get the game shows he hosts, well, at least not on the channels I have.
No.
So to us, he's just what we see on talk shows and stuff where we think, oh, who is this guy? Let's try and find an interview with him. And he seems so personable and fun in the interviews. It's like, oh, this guy could be really great. So I don't think Aussies and maybe the Yanks or whoever else around the world have really bought into, oh, it's Bradley Walsh. It seems to just be the UK fans.
Look, I think this happened previously with Doctor Who companions being cast, and I think, we go back to chap from Little Britain, Matt Lucas.
Yes.
I didn't have any problem with it, and when I first saw him, I fully accepted it, and I thought, this guy's going to be good. And when he was announced as a companion for Series 10, I was like, I'm ready for that. And of course, the number one example is Donna Noble, the casting of Catherine Tate, who just absolutely smashed any expectations that people had or preconceptions of her as just being light comedic character or comedy relief. That was not the case at all.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, before we get to the sports desk, Steve, we've got one more character to talk about. That's the Doctor. I'll kick off here and say I think Jodie played this whole story really well. She can't change history. Indeed, she doesn't want to change history, no matter how much it's burning her to just witness these human rights issues going on. She just has to sit there and take it because she knows it has to happen. And that was hard to watch at times. Of course, she wants history to stay on track too, but she doesn't want to be too involved in it, And I found this a very old school Doctor thing to be doing. It's Hartnell-esque, as we've sort of touched on earlier.
Very much, yeah.
I can almost feel if this story was done with Tennant especially, it might have involved some real grandstanding and a big speech, and it just would have been tonally wrong. This, I think, was on the money.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm not going to bag out Tennant. I think he has a time and a place and a discourse and a style of storytelling, and it worked in that era. I don't think it would work to sort of have done that with Jodie and to particularly have done that in this story. I long ago accepted Jodie as the Doctor, and I think what we're seeing now is that the material as well as the performance is actually there at last. To me, I think you might sort of recognise that she's also more of a Davison than most of the other Doctors, like a Tennant, for instance. And that's that kind of, kind enabler rather than a grandstander and show off in many ways. And I just think of that moment, like the sequence that most stands out is the look on Jodie's face, on the Doctor's face, with her back towards Rosa Parks as that moment is happening. And there's just this, my reaction was that there's just this sense of willing her on, or just sort of pleading with history and with Rosa that this is something that has to happen and needs to go through, as well as that shock that, oh my God, we're part of this, that we were on that damn bus and we were part of that crew. So that was a real lovely moment and really sort of showed off Jodie's acting chops. I thought that was incredible. And that is, as you say, in a very, very different Doctorish performance to a Tennant or a Colin Baker or a Tom Baker. It's much more Troughton, perhaps, certainly more Davison, and even Hartnell, as you say, that sort of subtlety. Yeah, I really appreciated that. I think she's wonderful.
Absolutely. And I've made a couple more comments here, and one of them is she's on the Davo end of confrontation than other Doctors, by which I mean, when it comes to confrontation and, when she was dealing with Krasko, I think she's at that less shouty, less overbearing, because she's a small person. So, yeah, Pat Troughton makes sense as well. They sort of play it differently when they're a smaller sort of stature. The Doctor, and I actually see this as a criticism being made of her by some people out there that she's just not, she hasn't got the big Tom Baker voice, you see, or whatever, and it's like, well, of course she doesn't, that's not how she's playing it, and I don't mind this at all, and but I get how it might seem different or weaker than the past Doctors to newer fans, but I don't mind it at all. To me, she's quite Davo.
No, yeah, and exactly, it is Davo, and I'm not accepting the argument that it's weak. The Doctor isn't weak by being kinder. I think it's quite the opposite. That's probably also a reflection on my own bias. Like yourself, Davo was my Doctor, at least growing up as a kid. I was, as a teenager, the Doctor that I'd most identified with. And I can kind of see that this is a sort of take on Davison where there's Davison plus humour. The running joke of her being Banksy and the Elvis and Frank Sinatra mobile phone gag was brilliant. And they're lines that Peter Davison's Doctor on television at least never got a chance to sort of go in that direction. But here she is. She's, as witty and clever and and cheeky as Tennant in many ways, but she's also as entirely sympathetic and empathetic as a Davison or a Troughton as well. And I think that's great. I think you can't have the Doctor played as one note. I have no problem with Tennant. I have certainly no problem with Tom Baker, but I love that there is this multifaceted, almost contradictory sort of nature to the different Doctors, and I love that you can tell different stories as a result of the fact that the character of the lead actor, the accents on it are different with each incarnation. I think it has to happen for the show to survive 55 years.
Exactly. And as a follow-up to that, the second point I'd made here about Jodie was that I love the two Banksy lines that she came out with. Which is or so am I?
Good. So good, yeah. Particularly, and they wouldn't have known this at the time with the recent sort of PR stunt where the the £1 million painting was shredded the moment that it was sold at Sotheby's, which is kind of a doctorish thing to do. Before we depart from Jodie, just one thing that I noticed. Did you notice she was wearing the maroon shirt today?
Yes, and I thought, where did she get that from?
Well, how about this? Is this a sort of sly reference or sort of parallel to the way in which Matt Smith's bow tie would change from red to blue based on whether they're in the future or the past, or like Tennant's suit? So this is the first time that we've gone back into the past, right?
Yes.
And when we used to go into the past with Matt Smith, he would have the sort of maroonish red tie to sort of signify the red shift. And when we go into the future, we have the blue shift going forward in time. I wonder whether we're going to see Jodie wearing the maroon shirt when we go back in time for the historicals, and the blue shirt when we're in the present and the future. That's my sort of initial sort of fanboy alert when I saw the shirt.
Now, that's a much more interesting take than what I had, which was on a very basic level. I thought, now, she got the black shirt from an op shop, so where'd she get the maroon shirt from? Did she have a matching maroon shirt on the TARDIS to one she got from an op shop? That's where my fan brain was going. Yours is much more interesting point to make. Now, before we hit the sports desk, Steve, we've got to do the Chibnall death count. And we remain on 5 3 episodes into the series. No one died here.
Yeah, I'm not going to count Krasko as a death. I think he is maybe going to reappear, but in any case, he's sort of been sent off to the golden age that never was, somewhere in the past by Ryan to live out his golden utopia. But I don't think that kind of counts.
Yeah, exactly. So enjoy it, Krasko.
There never was a golden age.
Exactly. And we're off to the sports desk. Right, so here we are at the sports desk. Your first time at the sports desk, Steve?
Yeah, no, this is very much an honour. Thank you very much for having me.
Because the green blazer fits you well.
Yeah, I pull it off well, don't I?
Now, for people who haven't heard us before, we do a play of the week, a foul of the week, and an MVP of the week. I think we'll start with the foul of the week. We'll sort of build up from here. What was your foul of the week, Steve?
Look, there wasn't a red card offence that was straight to the showers for me, but there were a couple that maybe were a little bit iffy. I'm not too sure about the use of the asteroid as a sort of climactic point. It was kind of a bit of an anticlimactic point. I really enjoyed that there was that sort of reference to the Medal of Honor or whatever it was that she was awarded to by Clinton, President Clinton, way back in '99. That's okay. I think the one that really sort of stuck with me was the use of the song, not so much in the scene, but over the end credits. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not someone who's against the idea of having a song or even silence over the end credits. And just the other night, Spanky Backpack on Twitter, if you don't follow, please do so, did a beautiful mock-up of Life on Mars over the end credits of The Green Death, and that was just gorgeous. And
wow.
Go check it out. And I also think there's that sort of, obviously the part 4 of Earthshock, I think can only be enhanced after you've heard Our Cold Star Child. But this one didn't quite work for me. This one was just a little bit too sledgehammer, and I think I would have appreciated just the normal outro with the great new Sega Canola music. Yeah, so probably a yellow card for persistent fouling rather than red card for knee-high tackle.
Okay. All right, I can go with that. It's not my foul of the week. My foul of the week, Steve, is the choreography when Krasko shot his own luggage.
Oh.
I think more could have been made of that scene. If people think back to it, it's very quick. It's kind of like a long shot. You can see Krasko on the left, Jodie's on the right. She sort of turns around, throws his bag up into the air. He shoots it, and life moves on. And I thought, this could have been maybe a bit more tense. It could have been a bit tougher. There could have been a struggle.
Okay.
Like she could have turned around with it in her hands. He could have been going to shoot her. She could have thrown it straight at him. They could have tussled. She's been using Venusi and Aikido in the previous episode. I'm thinking lots of quick cuts. It's a struggle. Instead it was just like, I'll just throw this in the air, zap. Okay, you shot your luggage. Okay, let's move on. And I thought, I just think this could have been so much better.
That's really interesting because I saw that and I almost applauded because it was just such a clever doctory thing to do, and it was over in an instant, and he was so thick that he didn't think that it would happen. I actually thought that was quite clever, and I liked it. That
is a good take on it. That almost makes me okay with the scene. But on first viewing for our hot take, I was like, oh no, I want a struggle here. I want sort of a James Bond sort of slugfest.
Yeah, okay. But, have a look at those 2 examples or 3 examples that we've talked about, and they are such minor things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Play of the Week. I'll take lead here, Steve. My Play of the Week is doing an historical episode, full stop. Whether it was Chibnall having the idea and telling Blackman to go and write it, or Blackman coming up with it from the start, to go and do an historical, albeit in the modern Doctor Who sense, which, as was discussed, isn't a pure historical, I think it's still great. And to include the extra information for the kids, it takes Doctor Who back to that educational Hartnell era vibe, but in a modern way. I just think it's great. I'm not going to call it gutsy, because I think people have been calling for it for a long time, and I think people quite like historical-based things, but I will call it clever, and it's my Play of the Week.
That's a good one, and I think it sort of chimes into my one, which is the scene at the end on the bus. I think when we look back on this in decades to come, this is going to be one of those immortal moments of television that Doctor Who did. That was just outstanding in every single way, technically, from a writing point of view, the actors, the scoring. There was just nothing other than just brilliance in that scene, and I think it is absolutely perfect.
Oh, absolutely. In much the same way, and I know we've already mentioned Vincent and the Doctor, but when we have Bill Nighy saying, that wild man who walked through the fields of Provence,
exactly.
And, the music swells and the camera is spinning and Vincent bursts into tears and Smithy's like, is it too much, Vincent? That scene is already immortal, and this will be too. I quite agree.
Yeah, and to the point where, I still haven't made my mind up about the whole of Vincent and the Doctor. I'm not sure that those last 5 minutes sort of make up for some of the holes in the rest of the story, where there were no holes in this story at all, and it was just beautifully told, and told with a purpose and in the right way, and that scene was really much the capstone. So definitely my Play of the Week.
Fantastic, which just leaves one category, Steve, and it's going to be you taking lead on this. That's our MVP.
This is really difficult because you could give it to absolutely anyone and everyone, including obviously the I forgot her name, I'm sorry, but the actress who played Rosa Parks, who was just wonderful.
Yeah.
But I think this was an episode that really highlighted Tosin Cole's acting ability. I know Dave has spoken very highly of him, and I think he's sort of reached new heights here, and I hope that it continues. I hope that he gets more of this kind of really great, worthy sort of role in the TARDIS, and some great scenes and lines. But yeah, this is his MVP award for this episode from me. He was brilliant.
Yeah, Dave will lose his mind when he sees this episode because he's already team Ryan. And,
he is, isn't he?
Yeah, he'll just think this is great. I can already say that with surety. For me, though, it's Graham with Ryan a close runner-up.
Yep, fair.
There was good dialogue from both. There was realistic responses from both. They both helped the Doctor when she needed it without becoming the Doctor. When Clara was helping the Doctor, she was sort of becoming the Doctor, and there was even a joke made about it where they put her in the credits and it was Clara Who, and but here the companions are doing really well, but it's not Graham Who, it's not Ryan Who. They just did so well without sort of going into that territory that does tick off fans, including myself, I've got to say.
Yeah, look, I don't have a problem with Clara Who. I think it works, and it's just another avenue that Doctor Who can tell stories, but I get that point. I absolutely see and concede how it would annoy people. I think and to sort of circle back to your point around these characters not being, companion who, but rather the companions, could this be Series 19's Crowded TARDIS done right?
Yeah, well, they've just got to get Yaz working a bit more, and it will be.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good call for sure.
Beautiful. Well, we've got a lot of tweets from listeners, but before we get to them, Steve, we've got to give our own scores out of 10 and a bit of a wrap-up. So,
yeah, okay.
Who wants to go first here?
I'm happy to go for it. I think this is a 9 out of 10. It could even rise in my estimation. Just on first and only viewing, I was blown away by it for all of the reasons that we've talked about, and probably 1,000 others that we haven't even thought of yet. This is a story that will only continue to sort of gather layer upon layer of, sort of really interesting readings and sort of takes on it. There is such enormous pathos and beautiful empathy that sort of comes from it. It's got a message that is incredibly timely and is a wonderful reminder, I guess, of what is, maybe the best of us. And I just think that this is incredible. And 9 out of 10 is on the low end. So this is brilliant.
Alrighty. I'm going in with a solid 8.5 out of 10. And this was so very close to being 9 out of 10 for me too. Clearly, to me, this jumped ahead of the first 2 episodes, which, I thought were really solid. But this was even better. It was not preachy. It was historical Doctor Who. It wasn't quite perfect in places, hence why I didn't give it 9, and it's certainly not a 10.
Okay.
But geez, it was good. It was so very good. And I would be very proud to show this to a non-Whovian this episode, which I think is the strongest thing I can say about any episode, just to go to a non-Whovian, here, watch this. This is what I think the best of my show is about.
I think you're right. That's a wonderful way of putting it. I would be proud to show this to a not we. Yeah, this is exactly that kind of show.
Yeah. So I it's only in quotation marks 8.5, but that's how I feel about it. I feel very strongly about it.
Cool. Yeah, lovely. I think we're on the same page.
Beautiful. Okay, and to close out, we have some hot takes from Twitter from some of our listeners. David Clark at DavidClark14 says, well, just watched Rosa and I'm really impressed. A great history episode handled with great care and sensitivity. Difficult to choose a star player, but it would have to be Vinette Robinson Rosa. There you go, that's her name, Steve. Vinette Robinson. And Graham's still my favourite, 9 out of 10.
Valid. Yeah, absolutely good call. Bernard D follows and he says, starting to flow now and seeing what can be done by the new regime. Fast improvement over last week's fumbling effort. And that also, I think, is a good comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick from Nicky Quote on Twitter says, tonight's Doctor Who was so sincere, so angry at injustice and so full of heart that it felt like something new being built on themes that were always there, if usually hidden behind analogies or quips. Really looking forward to hearing Jodie into Terror and the Doctor Who show's reactions. Well, you've just heard ours.
Yeah, that's
and
a really
tune
good
into
comment.
Jodie into Terror too.
Yeah, this is the new Flight Through Entirety boys. They've got a reaction cast. Definitely worth tuning into that one. I think you're right. Nick, he mentions the idea that it's no longer using analogy. This is outright, the stories that are being used. And I think it was a bold and beautifully executed step.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Wanderer at fishy_Wander says, I love this episode. It's one hell of a reminder we all need. I have a small itty-bitty issue with a scene, but overall bloody fantastic.
You can't tell Wanda's from Australia?
Yeah.
With the bloody fantastic there at the end.
Yeah, I could guess.
And Wanda has written us a longer email where she talks about the issue she has with a particular scene, and we'll do that on our monthly episode at the end of the month.
Looking forward to it. Nice one.
Daniel Martinez at Electric Maestro 5 says, while I feel the episode lacks as an entertainment piece and better serves as a learning piece, unlike with Vincent and the Doctor where it balances both pieces well, I still feel it will positively impact the viewers in learning about Rosa's story. A good lesson indeed. Okay,
all right. So I guess, I can see how that would be the case. I probably think that it is a perfect little piece of entertainment as well as infotainment or education as well. So not sure I 100% agree, but I take the comment.
It certainly packs in more than Vincent and the Doctor, I think.
Yeah, I think so too, definitely. Mark at Mark Cameron Now that was more like it. Well written, paced and performed by all throughout. Jodie went from a likeable stranger to feeling like the Doctor for me, and I love that Rosa's history is due to her and her life, not because of interference. So much more to say, but for now, thumbs up. That actually is a really good point. It's not the Doctor saving the day. This is Rosa standing up, and it's nothing to do with the Doctor.
Yeah, I guess the Doctor had to engineer the situation because Krasko had sort of messed things up a bit. But in the end, she just had to sit there quietly looking ahead and hoping
Yes, exactly.
that Rosa did her thing.
Yeah, no, beautiful, beautiful. Okay.
Well, that brings us to the end of the episode, Steve. Don't they go quick?
They really do. I think that I probably could talk about this all night, but that's probably not the intent of these kinds of podcasts, so we might have to leave it there.
That's right. Before we go, though, where can people hear more of you?
Oh, okay. So, New to Who Podcast. Find us at New to Who Podcast on Twitter and find us in your iTunes or Apple Podcasts, or whatever it's called these days, or podcatcher of choice. New to Who. Particularly timely that you've got me on this time, because this Sunday we've got a show coming up, dropping with none other than Dave himself for the last First Doctor story, The 10th Planet.
Ooh, that'll be a treat.
Yeah, it was good fun, that's for sure.
Really looking forward to that. But until then, I've been Rob.
And I've been Stephen.
And we'll see you next time.
Be seeing you.
You've been listening to The Doctor Who Show, the podcast where too much Doctor Who is barely enough. Subscribe to us on iTunes or listen through the website at www.thedwshow.net. Write to us at hello@thedwshow.net or send us a quickie on Twitter @thedwshow. Facebook.com/The DW Show is also a good place to find us if you're so inclined. Our version of the Doctor Who theme arranged by George Locke. Look him up on YouTube, folks. This podcast is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. Doctor Who, all names and sounds, and any other related items are trademarks and or copyrights of the BBC. All other trademarks and trade names are properties of their respective owners. The official Doctor Who website can be found at www.bbc.co.uk/Doctor Who.